Welcome everyone to the Symposium on Smart and Autonomous Medical Systems. It is a interesting, joyful, exciting time for us to meet together on a topic like this. I'm Julian Goldman. I'm going to kick off the day with a presentation, but I have a few announcements first. Everyone sitting here should realize that this is being live streamed. And it will be permanently, whatever that means, available online after this meeting. So keep that in mind as you make comments and as you are on camera, which is back there. You're on notice right now. So I'd like to thank everyone who's traveled here today to attend in person. We did have a limited capacity because of the needs for the room setup, including breakout table areas and so forth. And that's why we also added the live stream capability for people everywhere. In this room, you'll notice along the back, there is a timeline of 20 years of the medical device plug and play interoperability program, affectionately known as MDPNP. So later, when you have a chance, look at that timeline. For those who are out there on live stream, that timeline is also available on our website. Well, with that, I'd like to get started, and then we'll, at the end, recap some of the plans for the day and the agenda. So let me just get my thumbs up. May I go ahead? All right. So I'd like to open the symposium today by talking a bit about the history that brought us here to set the context for the motivations as well as some of the challenges along the way. And, given the time, I can't be comprehensive, so I'm hoping to hit certain key parts generally in order of time, but not specifically. So, leveraging past innovations to ensure a successful future for smart and autonomous medical systems, which we're calling SaAMS. SaAMS isn't a brand new term we invented today. It's been used in publications and government-funded grants and a whole range of other things for the last 5 years or so. But this was the right time, after a few years of planning, to reveal it more publicly, talk about it, and what it could imply. So what happened 20 years ago? Well, a number of you remember because you were involved. In fact, how many of you were around and participated sometime back there? Wow, a lot. About a quarter of the audience. So this has been a journey that we've taken together. So we started the program, Medical Device Plug and Play, we called it for simplicity and not to be overly technical, based at the Massachusetts General Hospital and SIMIT. And we have people here who helped to start the program. And it was related to the operating room of the future at Mass General Hospital, which revealed a lot in terms of challenges to innovation as well as opportunities to improve patient care. And it was also started with the collaboration and support of the U.S. Army Telemedicine and Advanced Technology Research Center. So the program, the operating room of the future, opened in 2002. August of 2002 was our first patient, a physician who volunteered to have surgery. And then in that first 2 years, we clarified that we had a vision for rapid innovation and we could accomplish many things, but there were other things we couldn't accomplish due to interoperability barriers. So we really focused on things related to patient safety, that we realized that developing and deploying new patient safety solutions was impeded by the absence of medical device interoperability. And, people like to talk about the internet and the last mile and the first mile. And if you think about the data that comes from a patient with a connected medical device, you could think of the first mile, the data from the patient that's being collected. It could be things like an electrocardiogram or oxygen saturation, or it could be much more robust and complete information, comprehensive information, say, from a ventilator, which could have dozens of data elements that are all relevant to the care of that patient. The data may not only be from the patient, it may be from the device. How is the device performing? What are its settings and so forth? So for convenience, we can call that the first mile. So what is the last mile? Well, the last mile is bringing the data back to the device at the bedside. It could be a different data. It could be pushing a cybersecurity patch or update. It could be sending information and programming that device for use on the patient. It could be setting an infusion rate for an insulin pump, other infusion pump, or adjusting a ventilator setting. So we started to think about this as not just a challenge related to pulling a few data elements and sending them to the EHR, but rather looking at a more complete circle of data. Well, in the first 2 years or so, we rapidly developed a stakeholder community of hundreds of participants in workshops and symposia, on-site meetings held in different places, including a key second meeting that was held at the FDA, smaller meeting, and then eventually a larger one. And the community, we kept asking the same question. How do we get this done? How could we have our medical devices work together in an ecosystem that will help us to innovate for patient safety? And this list is from that time. And you could look at this list and say, well, this is a good list. It applies today. That's part of the problem. We shouldn't have the same list 20 years later. So those who develop the technology and the devices would say, well, what is it that you actually want? What kind of clinical problems are you trying to solve? We don't know anything about these problems. They're not even documented. They're not reported. They're not collected at a national level. And they always complained about regulatory obstacles, specifically that the FDA will not let us provide these solutions and better equipment. Well, was that true? Well, the FDA participated in our kickoff meeting in May of 20 years ago, and they participated in force. And you'll hear from a panelist today who was there at the kickoff meeting. Liability concerns about introducing new technology and new devices, especially if you start to interconnect devices and cross boundaries of responsibility and ownership. Who's going to own that responsibility? And many company after company would say, we're happy to provide open interoperable products, but we're not sure about the business case. In other words, where's the market demand? And the other excuse was, I'm using the word excuse, I think it's a fair word for some of the barriers that we hit. Well, there aren't suitable standards. And until the standards are fully nailed down, we really can't deliver products out to the market. And we know that standards typically evolve as products are released in every other domain. So that wasn't really a solid reason, but it was used as a reason. So the initial challenges were about alignment, aligning on the problems and solutions. And I just alluded to most of these. What is the scope? What is interoperability? Interoperability is in the eyes of the beholder. So the dominant thinking that predated the High-Tech Act in the years leading up to that period of EMR and meaningful use adoption was, well, it's a blood pressure value that goes from your physician's office when you visit once a year, and it goes into the EMR, and that's what we care about with interoperability, which was unrelated for the most part about the kind of interoperability we were talking about, something that could address patient safety at the sharp edge of healthcare delivery at the bedside, wherever that bedside was. And the pushback was quite a bit. It's too complex. There aren't enough standards, as I mentioned, and so on. The other interesting thing was hearing from manufacturers, of course our devices are interoperable. How could you say they're not? And again, it wasn't always intentional obfuscation. Not often it was. It had to do with what data is available. And some manufacturers provided very functional levels of interoperability, but a very limited data set intended to accomplish a very specific purpose. And it could be highly robust and reliable, but insufficient to enable a new way of thinking about patient safety. Okay. So in the beginning, around 2005, the community aligned and said, these are the things we have to focus on. Leading the developing and leading adoption of standards, defining the regulatory pathway, eliciting clinical requirements that were crisper, developing a vendor-neutral laboratory environment for collaboration, which really hit at the theme of CIMIT, which was perfect, given that's how we started, and investigate the safety of proposed engineering solutions. So we certainly heard that from the safety engineering and regulatory community and the FDA. It's nice to think of something new and better, but ultimately you have to prove it's going to be safe. Well, we had to establish the foundation for change, and that meant embracing a systems engineering approach. For example, we developed close relationships with INCOSI, the International Council of Systems Engineers. We had to define clinical needs amenable to interoperability solutions. If we just talked about things, there are a lot of other clinical needs, many more that don't apply to interoperability. So we wanted to focus on those that could address patient safety. And remember back at the IOM Institute of Medicine report around 1999, and then subsequent reports that showed somewhere between, depending upon the report, 98,000 or up to 400,000 patients die in US hospitals due to preventable medical errors. The numbers have been wide-ranging estimates, but they're all too high. And couldn't we address a fair or significant percentage of those with a better ecosystem that was amenable to change and amenable to deploying solutions? Now people, clinicians, patients, biomedical engineers and others walk around the hospital and they see potential problem, foreseeable problem, one after the other. Anyone who's been practicing in healthcare for more than probably 2 or 3 years can give you a list of all the things that just shouldn't be happening. And if you ask them, well, I don't think about that. It's beaten out of them. Why would you keep looking at problems if you can't fix them? It's just demoralizing. I would propose to you that it causes moral injury. There's a moral injury component when we see bad things happening to patients and we are powerless to do anything about it. So going down this list, you can see that we had to follow basic principles. There also were no procurement specifications. The company said, well, we're happy to build these products if hospitals tell us what to buy. Another chicken and egg problem. Imagine if you wanted to buy a new computer or camera, whatever, and you wanted to make sure it was interoperable with the rest of your products at home. So you could download your photo files. Could you imagine walking into a store like, big box store like Costco or other? Could you walk in with a list of the standards that you want to make sure are implemented and how they were implemented? And then you want to figure out which ones are applicable to the kind of pictures you take? I haven't seen anyone raise their hand that that's how they go shopping, right? It doesn't work that way. Asking the consumers of the products, typically hospitals, in this case, healthcare delivery organizations, to have this laundry list of standards that every medical device should meet with the details of that, it's pretty difficult. So that chicken and egg problem was a longstanding and significant one. So this is an early timeline from the beginning in 2004 until a seminal workshop held by and at the FDA in partnership with the Continua Health Alliance, Scott, and CIMMYT, Penny, and whoever else I'm not seeing from CIMMYT. So we understood, we being those that are trying to achieve this change, understood that we could collaborate early to solve some of these things, especially about alignment and messaging and a common goal and interest. So as you look down across this timeline, you'll see that we started convening and had the picture of a poster session. There's Dr. Louis Schott and his students. And then in 2006, we opened our lab, our interoperability lab in Cambridge. It has since been rebuilt in the building, which we won't get into those details. And then we had the NSF workshop in 2007. And then endorsements by medical societies, the AMA and others. I'll show more detail about that. We also worked for years on refining the ideas and using them to develop a standard. Standards are what manufacturers speak and what regulators speak. If you can produce a standard, you have a document that's crisp and clear for the most part, that's the goal, and that can be used worldwide. And later you'll hear from Dave Osborne a little bit about that and the implications of using a standard to drive change, because typically it's the other way around. And then there's something on the right in the screen called MD-FHIR, Medical Device Free Interoperability Requirements for the Enterprise, a procurement specification for use by hospital systems. So the workshop at the FDA in 2010, this is a screen cap from that time. And Dr. Chuck Friedman, I'm sure many of you remember Chuck, he's now He's been heading up and advancing a learning health environment agenda nationally and globally. He was working at the Office of the National Coordinator at the time, and he presented at the FDA workshop and presented a crosswalk of what was the hottest topic at the time, meaningful use, and crosswalked that to what we could use for medical device interoperability for patient care. That was a seminal event. How many of you were at the workshop in 2010? Well, about a dozen. There you go. So one of the things that came out of the workshop, and this had to do with a chicken and egg problem again, is manufacturers said, FDA said, submit a product to us and we'll tell you, we'll see if it'll be cleared. And, just give us an interoperable product. Now, how do you build one interoperable product? What does it interoperate with? It defies everything, nothing with itself. Build two of them. So the manufacturer said, "Oh, what? What are you talking about, FDA? We should submit something and spend a few years, and you're going to tell us if it passes muster." The FDA and all of us together said, "Well, we have to try a different approach. Let's make up a product. Let's make one up, and let's make believe it's a product that does something." In this case, maybe a ventilator or a pulse oximeter, and we work with that with a ventilator. Let's make believe it exists. Let's define its specification. Let's talk about the functions of its interface, and let's use it as a thought experiment, as you normally do in physics. And let's do that. And that's what the FDA proposed. And we worked together with about 20 groups and individuals for several years and developed a prototype regulatory submission. And we kind of worked on that and detailed that. And that was the first time that we were aware of where everyone in the community with leadership from the FDA said, it's actually a way we can kind of break this impasse without expecting one vendor to carry a load for a few years and still not to work, because it has to be part of an ecosystem. The next thing that we worked on was something called MD Fire, because again, we were getting pushback that hospital systems should be asking for products that are interoperable in order for the market to deliver those. So this was something that we worked on as a community, and hospital systems, so then at the time Partners Healthcare, now Mass General Brigham, and Johns Hopkins and Kaiser Permanente, and eventually the VA together. And from each organization, we had 5 stakeholder groups. 5: purchasing or materials management, biomedical engineering, IS, clinical, and legal. Every one of those organizations had those groups, and then they kind of separated off. The legals would talk to each other, and procurement would talk to each other, and the clinicians. But in the end, we created a document that has been publicly available and said, these are the kinds of, you want your claims of interoperability to be clearly specified in the document, and your conformance to standards to be clearly articulated. And these are the clinical reasons. Now, frankly, it was too early because the products weren't available, but it sent a clear message to industry, and it helped to break an impasse at the time. The other thing we needed was a much stronger message from clinical organizations. So, one by one, brick by brick, starting with the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation and Dr. Jeff Cooper's support and others, we developed language stating that these medical societies wanted to see interoperability available because it mattered for patient care and patient safety, and this is a statement from there. It went through the Massachusetts Medical Society, went to the AMA. Through the AMA, that resolution included, I think, 14 other medical societies. And interestingly, the president of the AMA, the current president, Dr. Jesse Ehrenfeld, was the one at the time who helped move it through the Massachusetts Medical Society. So he was involved in these initiatives for a long time. He is an anesthesiologist, and you probably have seen him on social media and other things in the last number of months. So it was really Jesse who made that possible at the time. And thank you, Jesse, if you're out there. And then we needed a standard to help to articulate the vision and include the requirements. So we started to convene. Actually, we didn't know we needed a standard. We really just said, how the heck could we incorporate everything we've been talking about and learning for the first few years? Should these be papers and prototypes? And what do we do? How do we advance this? And a few experts, and I was working in the standards community at that time, and leaning on real visionaries of how standards could be used, one of whom sadly passed away this year. His name is Carl Walroth from Draeger, who's their head of standards and head of engineering for a while, had that Einsteinian hairdo for the longest time. So many of us were mentored by Carl, and other people like Dave Osborne, who you'll hear from today, said a standard is the way to get something really crisp and in a format that could have an impact. And so we agonized and fought and yelled at each other on the whiteboard, met at our offices on the second floor for the most part, and around the world. And what came out of that was the Integrated Clinical Environment, or ICE standard. So that was the origin of ICE, and the title there is Essential Safety Requirements for Equipment Comprising the Patient-Centric Integrated Clinical Environment. It was envisioned from the beginning as part one of a multi-part standard. It was the top level big story. So the notion of ICE has been very important because ICE describes a near patient architecture where devices could be connected, hopefully through standards-based interoperability, but until that's available, you connect them as you can. And it has the means to have an ICE supervisor which can host apps. So this was an app environment for clinical care, an app environment that's robust, reliable, secure, with real-time data where every device can consume the correct timestamp and all the data is available. And then a way to share that data or send it to and from the hospital information system or whatever other environment. So that's what ICE was all about. Notice that on the right side, there's a box that says data logger. That's the black box recorder, because we also recognize that until you had an accurate, comprehensive data logger, there is too much resistance, understandably, for manufacturers to contribute devices into an ecosystem to do advanced things. When something bad happens, and something bad may not mean harm to the patient, could be a device doesn't connect correctly or doesn't receive a command, or maybe whatever happens, or maybe someone writes an app that doesn't work correctly, and there are many reasons. Is it time to wake up? No, sorry. That you know what happened from a liability and risk management standpoint, quality assurance standpoint. So notice that the data logger is baked in, and that became the subject of another standard that was published a little bit later. And these standards received substantial ongoing support from a number of government agencies. So this is a way to show that partitioning of the local patient-centric environment in the ICE and that loose coupling to the rest of the environment, which could be far away. So this text comes straight out of the standard, out of part one. And it becomes a little confusing when you look up the ICE standard. You may see ASTM, the American Society of Testing and Materials, or you may see AAMI, and that's because the standard was transferred from one organization to another. Details don't really matter. So in ICE Annex B, we included clinical context and clinical scenarios. So that request for, we can't just have technical specifications floating in the air and not related to clinical need. We address that by including those in the back of the standard, and some people sitting here. I remember those here sitting in the back office and second floor of Lansdowne Street and working on these, Tracy. So, and I won't go through these clinical scenarios, but as you can see, they're right in the standard and they're articulated, and there's a method for doing that. So very quickly, I'm going to show what drove some of these clinical requirements. And these are old slides, and the problems have changed a little. But one of the challenges that well-documented patient harm occurred when intraoperative X-rays, when the X-ray is being performed for certain purposes, it's necessary to hold ventilation and turn off the ventilator for 20 seconds or so, which is not going to harm the patient. The problem is that there are cases in which people forgot to turn the ventilator back on because they were distracted by some other problem. The patient is covered, there are drapes and so on. Alarms might not be on. So this was a real world problem. And there was no way to, you can build your own smart alarm if you have a biomed department or computer scientists that want to do it, but how do you roll this out everywhere? So that, and then another example was, the way to do that would be why would you stop a ventilator? I mean, your camera shutter just synchronizes with a flash. It should just synchronize it. Couldn't do that. So we worked on that synchronization. We worked on the requirements and technology. We built it with a mechanical lung. synchronize it at the right phase of inspiration. So synchronizing the notion of doing it was published in 1999. I think that came out of the University of Florida at Gainesville. Where is it in the marketplace? Well, it's a great idea, but you can't build it if the ecosystem doesn't support innovation. So we did that. In the back, there's Dave Varney. Standing in the front is Dr. Jeff Cooper, who many of you know, who helped to found the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation. I want to talk about PCA for just briefly. I think everyone in the room has used or seen a patient-controlled analgesia system, press the button to get some opioid. The problem is it's an open loop system. You depend on the patient being too sedated to press the button, but family members could press the button. And I had one patient who told me right before anesthesia that she overdosed on her own PCA system. She pressed the button thinking it was a nurse call system. And they came into her room for a different reason entirely and rescued her. And that's why she was able to tell me the story. It was quite the story right before anesthetizing a patient. Well, the APSF newsletter, the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation, in 2006 said, we should be monitoring and automatically stopping these infusions. Well, try to find an infusion pump on the market in the US that you can build your own system and stop that using multiple factors from the patient. And there is a product on the market that does that, and it works, and it's a closed system. But if a research group wants to optimize that for a certain patient population or add more sensors for respiratory monitoring, can't do that in general. So what do you need to know to build a system like that? Well, you might want to collect blood pressure and pulse oximetry data, and you have to connect to the infusion pump to know its status, and you may want to write a new algorithm, but also you need to know the clinical context. You know, maybe someone pushed that button intentionally with what looks like an overdose because they're about to change a burn dressing, for example. So you need the clinical context. And I want to show you that in 2011, remember the other slide was from 2006? And APSF held another workshop to talk about the same problem. That's how intractable many of these things are. There's the willingness, there's the eagerness, there are the statements, but it still hadn't changed. And what I'm hoping for you to see today is that the change, it's now time for that change. And we now have the means to do that by building on the 20-year foundation of many collaborators and much work that's occurred, including a complete change in technology in our ecosystem, including AI and the like. This is an article I published in 2014, which kind of detailed to people and reminded them of their own experiences in which they had near misses or could have, avoided a problem. And there's some detail I won't go into. We received an award at the ASA for that, for a different system around patient-controlled analgesia, but this is a representation of what we did time after time after time to socialize the work. And are these ideas new? No. 2004, Society for Technology and Anesthesia. Mark, I'm sure you remember this. Home-to-home solutions. And, interesting little acronyms like LASI and WOOF. But there was, continuous monitoring and Nat Sims. Nat, I think you gave the wrap-up presentation. I know you're in. Oh, I just missed him. Nat gave the wrap-up presentation at this meeting that we held at the annual meeting. This was shortly after I joined MGH. Now, what's the purpose of this picture? Is it to show Dr. Goldman, the other Dr. Goldman, who will be speaking today, when she was pushing the oxygen flush button of the anesthesia machine at the ASA in 1990 and watching it fill up the bag? Okay, that might be the reason I'm showing you the picture. But there's another reason. And the reason has to do with everyone has been asking for years, well, what about AI? And it goes from interoperability, that's hard, to next problem is hard, to this, what about AI, I hear a lot. Well, here's the answer. It's pretty hard to read the sign over there on the back, but what it says is automated capnogram recognition using a hybrid artificial intelligence technique in 1990. So that was running in real time at the ASA. We were manipulating the valves of the anesthesia machine to cause real-time defects and recognize those. And if you have insomnia, you can look up the patent that was issued and is now expired. That's how long ago this was. So the reason for conveying this is I would like to share that a lot of the vision, the intent, and the requirements at an engineering level, at a system level, the interoperability of these systems has always been to support what? smart and autonomous medical systems. That was the thing you're supposed to say, right? That was the thing. I want to point out to a pivotal point in our program around 2010. And that was when we were funded by the National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering. I have someone here from that institute, Dr. Grace Peng, who was involved with our grant at the time. It was a $10 million funding under a UO1, and it allowed us to take what we had done until that point and go to the next level. And I'm just showing quickly the participants. Some of them are here today, some couldn't attend. There's Moberg Research, now different companies. Dick Moberg is here, DocBox, Tracy Roush is here. Mike Robkin from Anakina was supposed to be here, I think couldn't make it. FDA participation, VA participation, and so forth. So this was a moonshot, and it was a pivotal change. And at that time, we laid out that ecosystem that had to be developed. So I want you to see, this is a slide from that time period. It has use cases, requirements, architecture, software, tools, environments. It wasn't just a boondoggle to prove we can connect two things together with duct tape and baling wire and solve one use case. And now I'd like to show you that part of this is when we spent 2 days at the NIH. We drove a van down, there's a picture in the upper right, and drove the equipment down there and set up for 2 days. And in the picture, you can see on the right, Anura Fernando, who's in the audience. And I think I'm hidden in there somewhere. There are people on the left that you may recognize. And on the right, there's Dr. Jeff Shuren. And there's Dr. Rob Kolodner, who you'll hear from today as well. And Dr. Sandy Weininger, younger version of himself. Dr. Helen Gill and Vijay Kumar on the picture on the left. Vijay Kumar is now the dean, I think, at Penn School of Engineering, and he was at the White House at the time. So there's been tremendous sharing of information, and still it's been a hard problem to solve because some things just take time. I'd like to show point out that regulatory and FDA engagement. This is a letter for our workshop in 2007, signed by Donna B. Tillman and Dr. Larry Kessler from the FDA. Later on at that 2010 workshop with CIMMYT and Continua and the FDA, you can see who was involved. John Murray, who has since retired from the FDA, Dr. Sandy Weininger, who's here and can't seem to retire from the FDA, and me, who has the same problem. And we then established a research collaboration agreement with the FDA to work on pre-competitive issues. And Sandy and I are co-PIs between MGH and the FDA. That was in 2016 and has continued. And we will run through 2027. We also funded and supported by the FDA was a collaboration with MITRE, and I think the team is here, Margie Penny and others. Hi. And we worked on looking at cybersecurity in a shared manner as well. And now, fast forward to where we are today, and we formed the SaAMS collaborative community, which you'll hear more about in a short while. And there's, again, FDA engagement. I'm showing this because the most common excuse is that the FDA won't let us innovate. So I'd like to put that to bed, because that's not maybe it could happen, but that's just not it. And many of these other things, over time, they have been addressed. And that's why where we are today is a period for no excuses any longer. I'm going to, a lot of people know about other work with Ebola, remote control ventilators. I'm putting this in here to show again, FDA was on site at the time, helping manufacturers to try to address mitigations for Ebola related to healthcare technology. And of course, Department of Veterans Affairs has also been a partner through a MOU. So I'm going to jump ahead. I apologize. I wanted to kind of go quickly because I want to give a flavor of the work without extensive details, that things build upon each other, such as remote control of ventilators for the public health emergency from COVID-19, testing and deployment in our lab that was in partnership with Medtronic and their controllable ventilator. Apologize, let me just go back. And this is deployment of a Nihon Koden NKV 550 remote control ventilator. This is control from my home securely to the lab to test. The standards that have been now are available for people to use to build solutions. The incredible work led by Tatrick in collaboration with ASPR and a number of medical societies to advance technology rapidly under the National Emergency Telecritical Care Network during the pandemic. where we worked with teams to demonstrate numerous clinical scenarios that could be achieved through a better health technology ecosystem. These are all available online, all videos I'm just showing you. And then this was a little bit of my mind map for today's presentation and things I didn't talk about that fit into buckets of ecosystem, education, policy, research products and tools, commercialization, and product development. It's a lot, way too much to cover in the morning. But I wanted to convey to you that it hasn't been 20 years of the community doing nothing. It's been a tremendous amount of development. And it all began with a new way of thinking. That's what it began with. And then with a community that was willing to do something about it. So my charge to you is to think about a mission and vision for the SaAMS community and the SaAMS initiative. The mission to rapidly develop and deploy smart and autonomous medical device systems that address urgent healthcare delivery needs by convening, aligning, and leading critical healthcare stakeholders with a vision to create an innovative bedside near patient health technology ecosystem, near patient similar to bedside, that empowers providers and other healthcare stakeholders to swiftly implement interoperable, app-based, and smart and autonomous medical device systems, ensuring optimal patient outcomes, enhancing overall healthcare efficiency, and revolutionizing patient care. Today, you will hear from panelists talking about the clinical demand. You will hear from organizations that want to see solutions. Many people in this audience are empowered to do that. I think that everyone has to contribute in their own way as a community. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. I'm delighted you're here today. We have a packed schedule and I helped to slow it down a little bit. Thank you very much. And hello to everyone out there.